Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. The dead stretched out across the plain like broken toys, their armor glinting under the merciless twin suns. Sergeant Kellen Voss crawled through scorching sand, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through his body. Blood seeped from a wound in his side, turning the khaki sand into a dark wet paste beneath him. His helmet was cracked, the communication unit nothing but sparking wires and static. His squad was gone, all of them. In the distance, patrol engines roared, the unmistakable whine of scavenger vehicles cutting across the wasteland. Kellen's fingers dug into the sand as he dragged himself forward, inch by excruciating inch, toward the twisted wreckage of a transport ship. The hull had been peeled open by heavy artillery, its interior exposed like the carcass of some great metallic beast. He squeezed through a jagged tear in the metal, the edges slicing his uniform, adding fresh wounds to his collection. Inside, the air was stifling, the smell of burned circuitry and fuel hanging thick. Kellen wedged himself beneath melted metal scraps, trying to control his ragged breathing. Outside, the engines grew louder. He heard the crunch of boots on sand, voices barking orders. Clouds of dust swirled past the opening he'd crawled through. Check the wreckage. Command wants all bodies identified. Kellen's hand moved to his holster, empty. His weapon had been lost in the ambush. Sweat trickled into his eyes as he pressed himself deeper into his hiding place. The footsteps drew closer, a shadow fell across the opening. He was surrounded, unarmed, exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was fading, leaving only pain and the certainty of capture or worse. This was the end. Kellen closed his eyes, preparing himself for what was to come. The faces of his fallen comrades flashed through his mind, Ramirez with her quick laugh, Tenor who'd been counting days until retirement, young Ellis who'd never seen combat before this mission. Then movement in the shadow, not from the opening where the patrol lurked, but from deeper within the wreckage, from the broken wall where a turret had once stood. A figure silently emerged from a space Kellen hadn't even realized existed. The figure moved with predatory grace, thin but tense with coiled strength. As it stepped into a shaft of light filtering through the broken hull, Kellen saw it was a woman. Blue skin like polished cobalt stretched over sharp features. She wore torn armor, mismatched pieces salvaged from different units, and strapped to her back was a heavy sword with a curved blade that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light. She walked straight through the haze of dust toward him, silent as a ghost, seemingly unconcerned about the patrol outside. Her eyes, solid black without pupil or iris, locked with his. There was no compassion there, no warmth, only calculation. The woman stopped beside him. She looked down, a scornful smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Get up, weakling," she said, her voice low and harsh. "Only fools die here." Kellen stared at her, recognition dawning through his pain-fed mind. He knew her, had seen her before. She had been a prisoner, captured during a raid on one of the outer settlements. One of the enemy, blue-skinned, alien, dangerous. He remembered her eyes in the detention camp. She had stood apart from the other prisoners, silent and watchful while they cowered. She hadn't said a word then, not even when questioned. They'd marked her for special interrogation, but before that could happen. "You," he managed, his voice a dry rasp. "You escaped during the attack." Her smirk widened, showing teeth too sharp to be human. "And now I'm saving you. Ironic, isn't it?" She glanced toward the opening. "They'll search this wreck soon. Either move or die. Your choice." "Why?" Kellen asked, struggling to understand why an enemy combatant would risk herself for him. She knelt beside him, her face inches from his. "I've got my own reasons to move. You're just a means to survive." Her hand gripped his arm, strong enough to bruise. "You know the patrol patterns. I need a guide." With a sharp tug, she pulled him from his hiding place. Pain lanced through his side, and he bit back a cry. She slipped her shoulder under his arm, supporting him as they moved toward the gap she'd emerged from. Behind them, voices grew louder as the patrol entered the wreckage from the other side. They squeezed through the opening and into what had once been a maintenance shaft. The woman moved confidently through the darkness, dragging Kellen along. They emerged from the rear of the wreckage into a blind spot where the patrol couldn't see them. "If you slow me down," she whispered, "I will leave you behind." Together they set off across the dead plain, keeping low, using the scattered debris as cover. The zone ahead was full of raiders, traps, unbearable heat, and unexploded mines left over from the initial invasion. Kellen limped along, each step agony. The woman walked ahead, her back straight, her movements efficient and wary. Her sword was their only protection, and she made it clear if a fight broke out, he'd better stay back or die. She wasn't going to risk herself for him beyond what served her purpose. As they walked, Kellen studied her. Under the double suns, her blue skin shimmered with an iridescent quality. The armor she wore had been modified, stripped of insignias and reinforced with scraps of metal and ceramic tied with what looked like sinew. Her left arm was marked with intricate scarring that might have been decorative or the result of torture, he couldn't tell. Around her neck hung a pendant made of some dark metal, engraved with symbols he didn't recognize. Occasionally, her fingers would brush against it, as though drawing strength from its presence. "What's your name?" he asked as they paused in the shadow of a fallen calm tower. She didn't answer, just handed him a canteen of water. The liquid was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most precious thing he'd ever drunk. As she took back the canteen, the pendant swung forward. She quickly tucked it back beneath her armor. "You should conserve your strength rather than waste it on questions," she finally said. They continued moving as the suns began their slow descent, casting long shadows across the wasteland. By nightfall, they had covered several miles, putting distance between themselves and the patrol. They made camp in the lee of a rock formation, the woman building a small smokeless fire using chemicals from a pouch at her hip. Kellen leaned against the rock, his wounds throbbing. The woman sat across from him, the fire casting strange shadows across her face. "Thank you," he said, "for saving me." She looked up, those black eyes reflecting the flames. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a long way to go." "Where are we going?" "Away from here. There's a neutral outpost 3 days' journey east. If we make it there, we might find transport off-world." Kellen nodded. It was as good a plan as any, better than waiting to die in the wreckage. "I'm Kellen," he offered. "Kellen Voss." The woman regarded him silently for a long moment. Then she turned away, her attention focused on cleaning her sword with a cloth pulled from her pack. "Get some rest, Kellen Voss. Tomorrow will be harder." On the third day, they wandered into a forgotten minefield. The markers had long since been buried by the shifting sands, and it was only the woman's keen eyes that spotted the telltale disturbance in the ground pattern. "Stop," she commanded, throwing out an arm to halt Kellen. "Look at the sand. See how it forms those slight ridges. That's not natural." Kellen stared at the ground, seeing what she meant. The heat haze shimmering above the sand made it hard to focus, but there was indeed a subtle pattern to the terrain ahead, too regular to be formed by wind alone. "Mines," he muttered. "Old ones, probably from the first wave." The woman nodded. "We'll have to go around." They altered their course, adding hours to their journey. The detour took them across even more exposed terrain, and the merciless suns beat down upon them. Kellen's wounds had begun to fester despite the woman's rough attempts at treatment. Fever gripped him, making the world swim before his eyes. He collapsed in mid-stride, his legs simply giving out beneath him. The sand burned against his cheek as he lay there, unable to rise. "Get up," the woman's voice came from above him. When he didn't respond, she knelt beside him, her cool hand pressing against his forehead. "You're burning up," she said, her tone flat. Through the haze of fever, Kellen felt himself being dragged across the sand. He drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the woman's grip on his uniform and the scrape of his body over rough terrain. When he next opened his eyes, he was lying in shade. Above him was a metal ceiling, partially collapsed to reveal the sky. He was in some kind of structure, a desert beacon, he realized. One of the early warning posts established during the initial push into this territory. The place was abandoned, filled with the detritus of war, scorched bones, melted helmets, silence. It had the feel of a tomb. The woman sat nearby, her back against a console, her sword across her knees. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. "You almost died out there," she said matter-of-factly. "Hard to believe your kind ever reached the stars. So fragile." Kellen struggled to sit up. His side had been freshly bandaged with strips of cloth torn from his own uniform. The wound still hurt, but the burning sensation had lessened somewhat. "You treated my wound," he said. She shrugged. "What use is a dead guide?" Kellen took stock of their surroundings. The beacon was little more than a shell now, but it provided shelter from the suns and had likely once contained supplies. "How long was I out?" "Half a day. We need to move soon. This place is too exposed." "Where did you learn to treat wounds like mine?" The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "We have wars too, human. I've seen worse injuries than yours." Kellen nodded. Of course they did. It was arrogant to think that her people were any less complex than his own. He'd been part of an invasion force, after all. They had been defending their homes. "What's your name?" he asked again, hoping that their days of shared survival might have earned him at least that small trust. She didn't answer, just rose to her feet and began searching through the ruins for anything useful. That night, they shared a small fire lit from broken cables and dry shrubs the woman had gathered outside the beacon. The flames cast eerie shadows across the ruined interior, making the place seem even more like a tomb. Kellen watched the woman as she used a small stone to sharpen her sword, the rhythmic scraping the only sound in the silence. Her movements were precise, practiced. This was a ritual she had performed countless times. "Why didn't you finish me?" he asked suddenly. "When you found me in the wreckage? It would have been easier for you to kill me than to drag me all this way." The woman paused in her sharpening, the stone held suspended above the blade. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her eyes, a hint of emotion where before there had been only cold calculation. "Because you're one of the few who didn't look at me like an animal," she said quietly. Kellen frowned, unsure what she meant. Then it came back to him. The detention camp. He had been assigned to guard duty one day. He remembered seeing her standing apart from the others, defiant in her silence. The other guards had taunted her, some making crude suggestions about what they'd like to do to her. Kellen had ordered them to stop, had treated her with the basic dignity afforded to prisoners of war under the conventions. "You remember," she said, reading his expression. "That small kindness is why you're still alive. That and your knowledge of this territory." She resumed sharpening her blade, but something had changed between them, a barrier had been lowered, if only slightly. "My name is Aaron," she finally said, so softly he almost missed it. "Aaron," he repeated. "Thank you for saving my life." She looked up, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "Don't thank me yet. We're still a long way from safety." As the night deepened, Aaron told her story. Her clan had been wiped out in the early days of the invasion. She had been one of the few survivors, captured and sold as a war prize to a commander who collected exotic specimens. She had escaped during a transfer, killing her handler and taking his sword, the very weapon she now carried. "I'm headed to the neutral outpost because there's nothing left for me anywhere else," she said, staring into the flames. "My home is gone. My family is dead. My world is occupied." Kellen said nothing. He had been part of the unit that had raided her world. Back then, they had been told they were liberating a planet from a brutal regime, bringing peace and stability to a chaotic region. They hadn't known, or perhaps hadn't wanted to know, that there were women with swords defending children, people with homes and lives and stories. "I'm sorry," he said finally, knowing the words were inadequate. Aaron looked at him, her black eyes reflecting the firelight. "You were a soldier following orders, just as I was. The difference is, you won." They fell into silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire slowly died down to embers. The sandstorm hit without warning on their 5th day of travel. The sky turned a sickly yellow, then brown, as massive clouds of dust rolled toward them from the horizon. The wind picked up rapidly, howling across the plain. "We need shelter," Kellen shouted over the rising gale. Aaron scanned the terrain ahead. "There's a ridge to the east. If we can reach it, we might find caves." They ran, the wind pushing at their backs, sand beginning to sting their exposed skin. The storm rolled over them like a wave, engulfing them in choking dust. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The wind screamed like a living thing in pain, and the sand sliced like razors. "Aaron," Kellen called, barely able to see her blue form ahead of him in the swirling dust. "Keep moving." Her voice was whipped away by the wind. Kellen pressed forward, his arm raised to protect his face. The sand scoured his skin, found its way through every opening in his clothing. He could taste it, gritty between his teeth. And then suddenly, Erin was gone. One moment she had been a shadowy figure ahead of him, and the next, nothing, just the howling, blinding storm. "Erin," he shouted again, panic rising in his chest. No answer came. Kellen stumbled forward, trying to maintain the direction they had been heading. The ridge had to be close, but in the storm, all sense of direction was lost. He might be walking in circles for all he knew. His foot struck something, a rock, perhaps, and he stumbled. There was a moment of weightlessness, and then he was falling, tumbling down a slope he hadn't seen. Pain exploded in his leg as he struck something solid. He screamed, the sound swallowed by the storm. He came to rest at the bottom of a steep embankment. Above him, the storm continued to rage, but here, partially sheltered by the ridge, the wind was less ferocious. Kellen tried to stand and fell back with a cry of pain. His leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, broken, almost certainly. Crawling, he managed to drag himself further under the ridge, finding a hollow where the wind couldn't reach him directly. There, huddled against the stone, he waited, for the storm to pass, for death to find him, for anything. Time lost meaning in the howling darkness. Kellen drifted in and out of consciousness, his broken leg throbbing in time with his heartbeat. At some point, the storm must have abated, because when he opened his eyes again, the air was clear, the silence absolute. Night had fallen, stars glittering coldly overhead. Kellen tried to move and gasped as fresh pain shot through his leg. Still not dead. Disappointing. The voice came from above him. Kellen looked up to see Erin perched on the edge of the embankment, silhouetted against the starry sky. Relief flooded through him, so intense it brought tears to his eyes. "Erin," he breathed. "You found me." She climbed down to him, her movements cat-like in their precision. Even in the darkness, he could see that she was covered in sand, her blue skin almost completely obscured by a layer of dust. "I almost didn't," she said, kneeling beside him. "The storm separated us. I made it to higher ground and waited it out. When it passed, I started tracking you." She glanced at his leg, her expression grim. "You fell." "Broke my leg," Kellen confirmed. "I can't walk." Erin wiped sand from her face with the back of her hand. "Can you move at all?" "Crawl." "Maybe." "Not far." She nodded, considering their options. Then, without warning, she reached for his leg. "This will hurt," she warned, and before he could prepare himself, she pulled the broken limb straight. Kellen's scream echoed across the ridge. The pain was blinding, all-consuming. For a moment, the world went white. When he came back to himself, Erin was tearing strips from her own clothing, fashioning a crude splint using pieces of debris gathered from around them. "Why did you come back for me?" he asked through gritted teeth. Erin didn't look up from her work. "We made a pact," she said simply. "And my people honor their pacts. Even though your people are gone." Her hand stilled, hovering over his splinted leg. There was a long silence before she spoke, her voice so low he almost didn't hear it. "Especially because they are gone." She resumed her bandaging, her movements more forceful now. "I am the last of my clan. If I abandon our ways, they truly die. So I carry them, even the traditions I never believed in." Her lips twisted in a bitter smile. The last keeper of a dead code. She continued bandaging him, her hands moving with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Her touch was not gentle, but it was competent, firm. "Next time, don't fall," she said, tightening the final bandage with a sharp tug. "It's hard to carry you with only one hand when the other's holding a sword." Despite the pain, Kellen found himself smiling. There was a certain dry humor in her words, a hint of the person beneath the warrior's exterior. "I'll try to remember that," he promised. At dawn, they continued their journey. Erin fashioned a crude crutch for Kellen from debris, but progress was agonizingly slow. His broken leg dragged uselessly, even with the splint. Erin walked beside him, occasionally supporting him when the terrain became too difficult. By midday, they had covered barely a mile. The twin suns beat down upon them, and their water supply was dangerously low. Kellen could see the frustration in Erin's posture, the tightness around her eyes. You should go on without me, he said during one of their frequent rest stops. I'm slowing you down too much. Erin looked at him, her black eyes unreadable. If I'd wanted to leave you behind, I wouldn't have come back for you in the storm. The outpost will still be there tomorrow or the day after. She rose to her feet, adjusting her sword harness. Besides, I've grown somewhat used to your company. Be ashamed to break in a new human now. Before Kellen could respond, Erin suddenly went still, her head cocked to one side like a predator sensing prey. Someone's coming, she whispered. Kellen listened and heard it too, the soft crunch of boots on sand coming from the other side of the ridge. Not the heavy tread of military patrols, but something stealthier. Mercenaries, perhaps, or raiders. Erin drew her sword in one fluid motion, the blade gleaming dully in the sunlight. Don't move, she commanded, her voice low and intense. She stepped forward, placing herself between Kellen and the approaching threat. From his position on the ground, Kellen could see 3 figures rounding the edge of the ridge. They wore mismatched armor like Erin's, but with red bands tied around their upper arms, the mark of the Dust Jackals, a notorious mercenary group that scavenged battlefields for valuables and hunted survivors for bounty. The lead mercenary spotted them and raised a hand, halting his companions. His face was hidden behind a respirator mask, but his stance showed surprise, and then recognition, as he took in Erin's blue skin. Well, his voice was distorted by the mask. Look what we found, boys. A kobold and her pet soldier. Erin didn't respond, just adjusted her grip on her sword. There's a nice bounty on both your heads, the mercenary continued. The Federation wants their deserter back. He nodded toward Kellen. And the Coalition would pay handsomely for a kobold prisoner. Especially one who's killed as many of their commanders as you have. You won't collect either bounty today, Erin said calmly. The mercenary laughed, the sound hollow behind his mask. 3 against 1, blue girl. And your friend there doesn't look like he'll be much help. 3 against 1, Erin agreed. Hardly seems fair. Perhaps you should call for reinforcements. And then the dance began. Before the mercenaries could react, Erin was moving, her sword a blur of motion. She struck, fast, silent, lethal, straight at the leader. The blade found the gap between his chest plate and shoulder guard, sinking deep. He didn't even have time to scream. The other 2 mercenaries recovered from their shock, drawing their own weapons, a Vero blade and a compact pulse rifle. Erin was already moving, spinning away from the first mercenary as his body crumpled. The one with the rifle got off a single shot that went wide, and then Erin was on him. Her fighting style was unlike anything Kellen had ever seen, not the disciplined, standardized techniques taught in Federation armies, nor the brute force approach favored by Coalition troops. This was something else entirely, fluid, adaptive, almost beautiful in its deadly precision. The second mercenary fell, his throat opened by a reverse stroke of Erin's blade. The third, seeing his companions dispatched so quickly, turned to flee. He made it 3 steps before Erin's sword took him in the back, piercing through armor and spine with terrible efficiency. When it was over, the sand drank blood, turning dark red then black under the merciless suns. Erin stood among the bodies, her chest heaving slightly with exertion, her sword dripping crimson. Kellen stared, both awed and unnerved by what he had witnessed. He had seen combat, had killed his share of enemies, but nothing like this cold, efficient slaughter. He struggled to his feet, using his makeshift crutch for support, and stepped closer. Erin didn't turn, still focused on the bodies at her feet, checking that they were truly dead. Who are you? Kellen asked, his voice hushed. Really? Erin finally looked at him, wiping her blade clean on one of the mercenaries' cloaks. There was blood spattered across her blue skin, already drying to a rust color in the heat. The one you should have killed back then but didn't, she said simply. Thanks for that. She sheathed her sword and began searching the bodies, collecting anything useful, water, ammunition, medical supplies. Kellen stood silent, understanding that he had just glimpsed something few ever saw, a warrior of her people in their element. No wonder the Coalition feared them. We should move, Erin said, straightening up with her scavenged supplies. Where there are 3 mercenaries, there will be more. They hunt in packs. Kellen nodded, still processing what he had witnessed. As they set off again, he found himself watching Erin with new eyes, not as an enemy, not as an ally of convenience, but as something he didn't yet have words for. By nightfall, they had found shelter, a cave carved into the base of a larger ridge, partially hidden by fallen rock. Inside, they discovered the remains of an old recon outpost, half collapsed but still offering protection from the elements. Power still flickered through some of the abandoned systems. A comm unit hummed with static, its broadcast range too limited to be useful. Empty storage crates and broken equipment littered the floor, evidence of a hasty evacuation. Aaron secured the entrance while Kellen examined the outpost systems, seeing if anything could be salvaged. His technical training proved useful as he managed to coax some life from the emergency lighting, casting the cave in a soft blue glow. Water recycler still functioning, he called to Aaron. We can refill our canteens here. Aaron nodded, setting down her pack and removing her sword harness with a weary sigh. For the first time since they'd begun their journey, she allowed herself to show fatigue. She sank down against one wall, stretching her legs out before her. "How's the leg?" she asked, nodding toward Kellen's splinted limb. "Still broken," he replied with a wry smile. "But the pain's manageable. Your field medicine skills are impressive." "Necessity," she said simply. "When you live on the edge of survival, you learn quickly or die." They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The only sound was the soft hum of the few functioning systems and the whisper of wind outside their shelter. "I have a brother," Kellen said suddenly. "Back home. Elias. He's the reason I'm out here. He's intelligence, specializes in civilian evacuation operations. The data chip I'm carrying contains the coordinates for safe extraction points for thousands of refugees." His hand instinctively went to the hidden pocket. "He trusted me to get this information through. Made me promise I wouldn't die out here." Aaron looked at him, her expression curious. "What do you believe in, Kellen Voss?" It was a question he had asked himself many times over the years of conflict. "I believed in duty," he said slowly. "In protecting the innocent. My brother always said this war was wrong, but he still fights his way, by saving those caught in the middle. This mission is his life's work, and now it's mine too." He looked away. "Every day we delay, more civilians die waiting for evacuation that never comes. And now." Kellen shook his head. "Now I just want to get home. See my brother. Try to make sense of it all." Aaron laughed, sharp and dry. "You wouldn't survive among mine," she said. "But maybe I wouldn't survive among yours either. Our worlds are too different. Yet here we are," Kellen observed. "Working together." "Necessity," Aaron repeated, but there was less conviction in her voice this time. As the night deepened, they shared the rations scavenged from the mercenaries. The food was bland, military-issue nutrition bars, but filling. They took turns standing watch, though both were exhausted from the day's events. During his watch, Kellen found himself studying Aaron as she slept. In repose, the hard lines of her face softened. She looked younger, vulnerable even. It was difficult to reconcile this sleeping figure with the lethal warrior he had seen dispatch 3 armed mercenaries without hesitation. "You're staring," Aaron said without opening her eyes. Kellen startled. "Sorry. I thought you were asleep." "I was," she said, sitting up. "But I can feel when someone's watching me." She stretched, rolling her shoulders to work out the stiffness. "My turn for watch. Get some rest." As Kellen settled down to sleep, he found himself asking a question that had been on his mind since their first encounter. "Aaron," he said softly. "That's your real name, isn't it? Not just something you told me." She was silent for so long that he thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's what my mother called me," she said. "Before she died. Before all of this." It was the most personal thing she had shared with him. A gift, he realized. A small piece of trust. "Thank you," he said. "For telling me." Aaron nodded, her expression unreadable in the dim blue light. "Sleep, Kellen Voss. Tomorrow will be difficult." Kellen woke to empty silence. The soft hum of the outpost systems had stopped, plunging the cave into darkness. He sat up, wincing as pain shot through his broken leg. "Aaron," he called, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. No answer came. Panic gripped him as he fumbled for the light source they had used the night before. It flickered to life, illuminating the empty cave. Erin's pack was gone. So was her sword harness. She had left him. The realization hit Kellen like a physical blow. After everything they had been through, after saving his life multiple times, she had abandoned him without a word. Perhaps it had all been calculation after all, using him until he was no longer useful, then moving on. He dragged himself to the cave entrance, using the wall for support. Outside, the twin suns had just begun their ascent, casting long shadows across the desert. Kellen scanned the terrain, looking for any sign of Erin there. Tracks in the sand, hers recognizable by the distinctive pattern of her scavenged boots. And others, heavier, broader, multiple sets. Kellen's blood ran cold. Not abandonment, ambush. Someone had taken her, or she had left to confront them away from the cave, away from him. He listened intently and heard it, the ring of steel against steel, a cry of pain or effort carried on the morning breeze, coming from the other side of the ridge. Without thinking, Kellen grabbed his makeshift crutch and began to move, following the tracks in the sand. His broken leg screamed in protest, but he ignored it, driven by a need he couldn't fully explain even to himself. He rounded the ridge, his breath coming in harsh gasps, and saw her. Erin stood in a small clearing, surrounded by 4 attackers. More mercenaries, judging by their mismatched armor and red armbands. She was bleeding from a gash across her shoulder, her sword still in hand, her stance defiant despite being clearly outnumbered. 3 bodies already lay in the sand around her. She had taken down their companions, but these 4 had her cornered, wary now of her deadly skill. Kellen looked around desperately for a weapon. His eyes fell on one of the fallen mercenaries. A broken spear shaft protruded from the corpse's pack, some kind of scavenged artifact. Kellen lunged for it, nearly falling as his broken leg gave way beneath him. His fingers closed around the shaft, pulling it free. It wasn't much, a metal pole about 3 feet long, one end sharpened to a crude point, but it was something. He limped toward the standoff, the spear shaft held like a club. One of the mercenaries spotted him, turning with a shout of warning to his companions. The momentary distraction was all Erin needed. She lunged, her sword taking the distracted mercenary in the side. Chaos erupted. Erin fought with renewed vigor, knowing she was no longer alone. Kellen swung the spear shaft at the nearest mercenary, connecting with the man's helmet with a satisfying crack. The mercenary staggered, off balance, and Kellen struck again, putting all his weight behind the blow. The fight was brief but brutal. Erin dispatched 2 more mercenaries with efficient strikes while Kellen managed to knock his opponent unconscious with repeated blows. When it was over, they stood among the bodies, both breathing heavily. Erin's wound was bleeding freely now, staining her blue skin an even darker shade. She looked at Kellen, surprise and something like respect in her black eyes. "You came for me," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Kellen nodded, leaning heavily on his makeshift weapon. "This time I'll cover you," he said, echoing her earlier words. "Get up, warrior." A small smile tugged at the corner of Erin's mouth, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "I am up," she pointed out. "You're the one who looks about to fall over." Kellen laughed, a release of tension that bordered on hysteria. "Fair point." They made their way back to the cave, Erin supporting Kellen despite her own injury. Inside, they treated their wounds with the last of their medical supplies. Neither spoke of what had happened, but something had changed between them. A balance had shifted. "Why did you come after me?" Erin asked later, as they prepared to leave the temporary safety of the cave. "You could barely walk." It was foolish. Kellen considered the question. "Because you came back for me in the sandstorm," he said finally. "Because we're in this together now." Erin studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, I suppose we are." They set out at midday, heading east toward the neutral outpost. Progress was slow due to their injuries, but they pushed on, driven by the knowledge that remaining in one place for too long invited danger. By sunset, they had reached the top of a high ridge. From this vantage point, they could see for miles across the wasteland, and there in the distance, an old cargo terminal, half buried in dust but still recognizable by its distinctive silhouette against the darkening sky. "The outpost," Erin said, relief evident in her voice. We'll reach it by noon tomorrow. Kellen nodded, too exhausted to speak. His leg throbbed with each heartbeat, and fever had begun to set in again. He swayed slightly, and Erin caught him before he could fall. Just a little further, she said, her arm around his waist, supporting him. We'll rest here tonight and make the final push in the morning. As they settled down, Kellen pulled out the data chip, turning it over in his trembling fingers. Tomorrow, he whispered. Tomorrow I fulfill my promise to Elias. All those people will have a chance. He looked at Erin, his voice gaining strength. When we reach the outpost, I need to transmit this data immediately. It's already been delayed too long. As they set up their meager camp, Kellen noticed that Erin was watching him with an odd expression. There was concern there, certainly, his condition was deteriorating, but something else as well, a decision being weighed. What is it? He asked, when he could no longer bear the scrutiny. Erin sat beside him, closer than she usually did. In the fading light, her blue skin took on a deeper hue, almost indigo. The wound on her shoulder had been bandaged, but spots of blood had seeped through the dressing. You should know, she said slowly, each word carefully chosen, saving me bound you to me by the laws of my people. We're joined until death or until the debt is paid. Kellen stared at her, trying to understand the implication of her words. What debt? Life debt, Erin explained, her fingers touching the pendant at her throat. When one warrior saves another's life, it creates a bond. My life is now your responsibility, as yours is mine. Her voice hardened. It is our way. She looked away, a flash of bitterness crossing her features. My people are gone, yet I still carry their laws. Sometimes that is worse than being free. She turned back to him, her black eyes unreadable. But I cannot escape what I am, what was carved into me since birth. And how do I pay it? Kellen asked, both curious and wary. Erin's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. By staying. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Staying with her. Not returning to his people, to his brother, to the life he had known before. Choosing a different path. I don't understand, Kellen said. You want me to stay with you? Where? Doing what? I don't know, Erin admitted. I have no home to return to, no clan to welcome me. But I will find my way, and now, according to the laws I still honor, you are bound to that journey as well. She paused, studying his face. Unless you choose to break the bond. Can it be broken? Erin nodded. By choice. If you decide to walk away, the debt remains unpaid, but the obligation ends. She looked away into the darkness beyond their small camp. I would not hold you to our ways against your will. Kellen was silent, processing her words. The idea of leaving his old life behind was both terrifying and strangely appealing. What did he have to return to? A brother who disagreed with his choices, a military that had left him for dead, a society that had sent him to invade other worlds without understanding what they were destroying. I need time, he said finally. To think about it. Erin nodded. Of course. The choice must be made freely, or it has no meaning. She rose to her feet. Rest. I'll take first watch. Morning brought clarity. As they broke camp and prepared for the final leg of their journey, Kellen found that his decision had been made somewhere in the quiet hours of the night, perhaps it had been made days ago, when he had first seen Erin standing over him in the wreckage, offering him a chance at survival. They reached the outpost just as the twin suns reached their zenith. The cargo terminal was more active than it appeared from a distance, a haven for smugglers, deserters, and refugees from both sides of the conflict. Ships of various sizes and conditions sat on makeshift landing pads, their crews haggling with local traders for supplies and fuel. Erin and Kellen made their way through the crowded terminal, drawing curious glances but no overt hostility. This was a place where questions weren't asked, where past allegiances meant less than what you could offer in the present. They found a communications array near the central hub. Kellen used his military access codes to transmit a signal on one of the emergency frequencies. Within minutes, a response came through. A Federation transport was in range and could divert to pick up survivors. They're coming, Kellen told Erin as he stepped away from the console. Should be here within the hour. Erin nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Then your journey is almost over. Our journey, Kellen corrected. At her questioning look, he added, I've been thinking about what you said. About the life debt. And I'm staying, he said simply. With you. Erin's eyes widened slightly, the closest thing to shock he had ever seen on her face. You would choose exile from your people. Your world. What about your mission? The data chip. Your brother. Kellen smiled, holding up the terminal's confirmation message. Already transmitted. While you were securing our passage. The evacuation coordinates are being received by all Federation outposts now. He tucked the empty data chip back into his pocket, a memento of a promise kept. Elias will understand. He always told me to find something worth living for beyond just following orders. He looked around at the bustling terminal, at the mix of species and cultures coexisting in this dusty outpost. Out here, we could find something different. Something better. Maybe help people on our own terms, not just Federation citizens, but anyone caught in this war. It won't be easy, Erin warned. We'll be outsiders everywhere we go. We already are, Kellen pointed out. At least this way, we'll be outsiders together. A small smile curved Erin's lips. Together, she repeated. Yes, I think I could grow used to that. On the horizon, a transport appeared, a Federation rescue ship responding to Kellen's signal. He fired the provided signal flare, watching as it arced high into the sky, leaving a trail of bright orange smoke. Erin stood beside him, leaning on his shoulder. Her sword was slung over her back, the blade clean and ready. They said nothing as the ship grew larger, its engines a dull roar in the distance. Kellen looked at Erin. She scowled up at him, but there was no real heat in it. Don't fall for me, human, she warned, but her voice held a note of something warm beneath the gruffness. Kellen laughed, surprising himself with the lightness he felt despite everything they had endured. Too late, he admitted. The ship descended, kicking up clouds of dust as it approached the landing area. Kellen held Erin as it landed, supporting her despite his own injuries, and she didn't pull away. As the ship's ramp lowered, they exchanged a look of perfect understanding. You asked how to pay the debt, Erin said quietly, her hand on her pendant. You've already done it. But now you're one of us. My clan. My war. Her eyes searched his face. Whether you meant to or not. Kellen realized what she meant. By the laws she followed, he had not just repaid a debt, he had become part of something larger, something that would likely put him at odds with his former life completely. Is that why you warned me not to fall for you? He asked with the ghost of a smile. Erin nodded, her expression solemn. The last member of a dead clan. And now its newest one. She touched the pendant at her throat, then, in a gesture he had never seen from her before, removed it and placed it around his neck. This marks you as Cobalt now. As mine. As the pendant settled against his chest, Kellen felt its weight, not just physical, but symbolic. He was choosing a side in a war he had once fought from the opposite front. He was binding himself to a code he didn't fully understand, to a people he had once helped destroy. And yet, looking at Erin, he found he didn't regret it. This wasn't the end of their story, it was a beginning. Of something complex, dangerous, and entirely unexpected.